Which dead celebrities are treated like saints, but were truly awful people when they were alive? Jerry Lewis. He treated his family like shit, cut his kids out of his will and was a real boss on set. Watched some clips on YouTube of him and his behavior. Terrible. Most likely stemming from when he and Dean Martin split from being Martin and Lewis. Everyone thought Dean would disappear and Jerry would go on to be a massive star. As it turned out, it was the complete reverse. He was a bitter person. This thread is massive, so I'll mention it again, but a friend of mine was working a charity show Julian was in and the two of them ended up chatting during a break. Apparently he's really nice. Julian was annoyed that people kept asking him to sing his father's songs, and his rant about that just morphed in a general rant about John. My father was abusive too, and this stuff is never all that far away, and it really can just come out talking to perfect strangers like that. It's sad that people aren't aware of this shit. She was more than a sympathizer. She was an actual agent for the Nazis. She tried using anti-Jewish Nazi laws to get her to Jewish business partners removed to leave her the sole owner of her brand. But they had outsmarted her before fleeing to the United States. They gave their majority share of the company to someone else who was not Jewish that they trusted. Chanel would use her place in high society to spy on all the other high society people and report back to her lover, who was a Nazi officer, if anyone was a possible threat to the Nazi party to be dealt with. So she was more than sympathetic. She was literally in bed with them. This was the one I was looking for. Michael Landon played wise, kindly characters on TV, like Charles Ingalls on Little House on the Prairie and Jonathan, a literal angel in Highway to Heaven, and a lot of people seem to think he really was actually that saintly in real life. And he could be quite kind sometimes. He adopted his first wife's children and initially treated them like his own kids, even though he was barely 12 years older than the oldest boy, but he had a cruel, almost sociopathic side too. He eventually left his first wife and married someone else, which isn't that unusual in Hollywood. He adopted his second wife's daughter, and initially treated her the same as his biological kids, which he had several of. However, he then left second wife and family for a much younger woman who worked on the Little House set, and then he publicly stated that he never really loved his second wife, which absolutely broke his children's hearts. He then told his kids that if they didn't accept his new wife with open arms, he'd have nothing to do with them. He had 2 kids with his third wife and left the bulk of his estate to them and very little to any of the kids from his previous relationships. It's like Michael Landon could only love certain people at certain times. Once he moved on, he gave all his love to the new people in his life, and treated the people he supposedly once loved as if they never really mattered to him at all. I don't wholly buy the narrative Bing didn't care about his family, or rather wouldn't defend them for being shitty unlike a lot of parents would. My grandfather actually broke Bing's son's nose on a share dock in North Idaho in the mid to late 50s. The son had been mouthing off, being rude, telling to the 2 women my grandfather had been accompanying out to the lake that he didn't want poor regular folk on his dock while he was on the lake or some rich kid shit. And the dock was shared with the Crosby private residence on Coeur d'Alene Lake in North Idaho, half public access, half private etc. Fairly common then. As the story goes, he told the son to quit mouthing off. The son said, "Do you know who my dad is?" or something to the effect of that. Continued to mouth off, and my grandfather threatened to lay him out. You can see where this is going. One thing leads to another, and he punches him square in the nose and the kid bolts up to the house. He brought Bing down, smoking the entire time, to go off on my grandfather, and Bing instead asked the 2 girls who had been there to explain what happened, to avoid a bias, and apparently Bing looked at his son with no empathy at all and said, "Looks like you got what you had coming," and just walks back to the house. Johnny Carson. He cheated on his wives and was an all-around prick when he wasn't on camera. The most widely known example was him telling Joan Rivers that she'd never become the star of The Tonight Show. She was the permanent guest host at the time, then refusing to ever speak to her again after she got a job elsewhere. Robert Evans did a great 2-part piece on Hitchcock in his podcast Behind the Bastards. One thing Hitchcock did was dare one of his crew members to stay the night chained to a camera on the movie set, then gave him a bottle of whiskey to help him take the edge off. The crewman gladly took the bet. Hitchcock laced the bottle with laxative, and the crew came in the morning to find him sobbing in his own shit on the floor. Hitchcock did a lot of jokes like this. Yeah, Pun was a legit thug. Used to snatch DJs right off the street, throw them in the trunk and threaten them if they leaked his music. Who kid has some crazy stories on YouTube about when he got set up and held at gunpoint. Plus the whole beef with Jay-Z and them, where Jay allegedly got hit with a champagne bottle. And that pistol whip video was brutal. Dude just clapped her and then sat down on the couch and chilled like it was nothing as his wife ran away holding her face. Definitely a bad guy. From Wikipedia. Picasso has been commonly characterized as a womanizer and a misogynist, being quoted as having said to one of his mistresses, Françoise Gillot, "Women are machines for suffering." He later told her, "For me there are only two kinds of women, goddesses and doormats." In her memoir, Picasso, My Grandfather, Marina Picasso writes of his treatment of women. He submitted them to his animal sexuality, tamed them, bewitched them, ingested them, and crushed them onto his canvas. After he had spent many nights extracting their essence, once they were bled dry, he would dispose of them. Of the several important women in his life, two, Marie-Thérèse Walter, a mistress, and Jacqueline Roch, his second wife, committed suicide. Others, notably his first wife Olga Koklova, and his mistress Dora Maar, succumbed in nervous breakdowns. His son, Paolo, developed a fatal alcoholism due to depression. His grandson, Pablito, also committed suicide when he was barred by Jacqueline Roch from attending the artist's funeral. Met Ricksman in person. He was a gem. He was the only actor to make sure all the fans got their playbooks signed after Seminar, his New York City play in 2011. Even stayed around to chat with little Almy and was kind and charismatic as always. Was tempted to never wash the hand he shook. Charles Dickens abandoned his wife for being too fat to hook up with an actress young enough to be his daughter. This is after his wife had 10 children by him. He also made inquiries about his wife getting put in an asylum. I think Jane Austen was okay though. Hook up with an actress young enough to be his daughter. She was younger than his daughter by a few months. He was 45, she was a few months over 18. His children had developed serious psychological issues. Some were committed to asylum, one died as a soldier trying to get his approval. Only one who somewhat survived with only depression was the kid who distanced himself from this asshole early on. He used to wax poetical about how amazing his babies were, for the first few months they were born. Then he was the worst human being in their lives. The worst thing I've ever seen about Mr. Rogers is he had a gay black man on his show to protest segregation but said they shouldn't bring up the fact that he was gay, and then of course years later he profusely apologized to him about it and said even though he was trying to pick his battles it was still wrong. The man of course entirely understood and they were still friends. Greatest flaw is he didn't try to solve all the discrimination at once. This was in like the 60s or 70s or something to where gay rights wasn't even a thing. Edit. Didn't expect this much attention. Agreed I should have said something more like gay rights was still quite early and defending it on a government-funded TV show would have been quite difficult. The logic he used at the time was we can't talk about how you're gay because they'll all want you to lose your job which, considering how insanely fucking homophobic everyone was during AIDS crisis times, I can't really find that much fault with TBH. Poor guy would have been a pariah instantly. I can already see the headlines of the evil gays are infiltrating our children's shows to push their agendas and shit. God, I hate this fucking world. My grandpa worked on Hitchcock's last movie as a key grip. Supposedly, just as they were about to shoot the last shot of the last scene, Hitchcock said, "I'm tired. Let's wrap. I'm going home." The entire crew tried to explain to him that this was their last day on set, and that they were scheduled to fly halfway across the country the next day. If they wrapped now, they'd have to recreate the entire set in a studio lot when they got back, costing them a lot of money just for an incredibly short film time. But Hitchcock insisted, so they wrapped, went home, and rebuilt the set from scratch. And that's ignoring the fact that Hitchcock had never gotten out of his car and had instead directed the entire thing from inside. I always find it so weird when people think Hitchcock was just this nice old man. My mom was a huge fan so I watched all his movies as a kid and I remember sitting with her on the couch watching The Birds and she'd be like, "Yeah, he sexually harassed Tippi Hedren during this movie." She loves movies and she was always very open about how a lot of the people involved in making them are absolute scum. Since no one mentioned them yet. Simone de Beauvoir and Jean-Paul Sartre. In her letters, de Beauvoir mentioned several romantic and sexual relationships with female students of hers. In one case, she met a 17-year-old student who she had a relationship, and later introduced her to Sartre, who also began to have sex with her. There were a few others who basically made up Sartre's personal harem, while de Beauvoir acted as the pimp, seducing teenage girls into threesomes with Sartre. Additionally, both were signatories of a petition to remove the age of consent laws in France. The petition was written by a known pedo, Gabriel Matzneff, and signed by other French intellectuals including Foucault, who himself has been accused of sodomizing boys. Frank Sinatra. My grandpa's girlfriend and her husband used to work for him, and he was a right bastard. Didn't think that he had to pay people that worked for him, treated employees bad, all the usual human stuff. Edit. My grandpa was a widower and his girlfriend was a widow. It was no secret at all. Frank did nothing to tamp down talk connecting him with mobsters. It was part of his mystique. What the mobsters thought of Frank is more a question. Many liked him, I've read, but also kinda considered him a bit of a pet. And Rickles was one of the few who could heckle the notoriously prickly Sinatra. There's a great old story about Don seeing Frank at a restaurant out one night and asking him if he'd drop by the table, give his wife a real thrill. When Frank did so later, Rickles greeted him with, "Oh, for God's sake, Frank, we're eating dinner here." Sinatra just laughed, but from what I've read, only Don could have gotten away with such a thing. Frank just loved him. But also, Frank was a pretty huge piece of shit. Frank Lloyd Wright abandoned his wife and children to take a mistress, who was herself already married. He drove his butler insane, and the guy ended up killing Wright's mistress and her kids, burned down his studio, and committed suicide by drinking acid. Wright wasn't there at the time. Wright's response to this was to rebuild the studio exactly as it was before, supposedly to honor his mistress and their children, but it was pretty obvious to people at the time that he just wanted to protect his legacy as an architect, as many of his most famous innovations were showcased in the design. Sure enough, it became the museum to his work and is still visited today. I've worked for Prince, and it's a not-so-hidden secret he was absolutely awful to work with. There used to be a saying, "You're nobody in this industry until you've been fired by Prince." He's a legend for sure, but was awful to those who put the show on, and his ego is out of control. And when it came down to it, he died from an OD. So for someone who was so quick to fire anyone over a simple mistake and he's so critical of weakness, it turns out he had some hidden weaknesses of his own. Also, from all accounts, Jim Morrison was an awful person. Later, when Nothing Compares to You made her a star, O'Connor said the song's writer, Prince, terrorized her. She had pledged to reveal the details when I'm an old lady and I write my book, and now she has. She writes that Prince summoned her to his macabre Hollywood mansion, chastised her for swearing in interviews, harangued his butler to serve her soup though she repeatedly refused it, and sweetly suggested a pillow fight, only to thump her with something hard he'd slipped into his pillowcase. When she escaped on foot in the middle of the night, she writes, he stalked her with his car, leapt out and chased her around the highway. Source. Prince was awful to his grieving wife after their son died, but he still forced her to do an interview with Oprah. He had me on my feet, but I was sobbing, Garcia writes in an excerpt published Thursday by People magazine. People came. A mask of heavy makeup was applied to my face. My husband took Oprah on a tour of Paisley Park, and her mission was clear. She'd come to find out if the child was dead or deformed like people were saying. Prince was clear in his request to Garcia that he didn't want her to say anything about their late son, who was born on October 16 that year, during the conversation with Oprah. Maite Garcia says her ex-husband Prince asked her to keep quiet about her son's death in an interview with Oprah in 1996. Maite Garcia says her ex-husband Prince asked her to keep quiet about her son's death in an interview with Oprah in 1996. Sinead Lynch, AFP Getty Images. I sat on the sofa, smiling a pretty ballerina smile, Garcia writes. I'd been instructed by my husband, say nothing about Amy Iyer. https://www.nadalanews.com/entertainment/music/prince-quiet-sun-death-oprah-segment-article-1.300010. Kandinsky, fled Germany and let his artist girlfriend stay and hid his and other greats art so they couldn't be found and destroyed by the Nazis. She was an artist herself and was in danger, as well as would have been killed if the artworks she was hiding were found. He hid in Denmark, and instead of returning to her he had forgotten he had a girlfriend, who risked her life, and got married to someone else. To make things worse, he decided to steal his ex's style of abstract painting, and this is where his work started to get recognition. Edit. Wow, did he think this would get so much interest? It was Gabriel Munter he left. My source is an academic and gallery director who worked in the gallery I also worked in, mainly Impressionists, Courtauld. Can't speak for myself, but I have a friend who used to work at our local venue where musicians would play. He said both Weird Al and Billy Ray Cyrus were two of the nicest people he got to work with. Edit. Forgot to mention, I can speak for Keanu Reeves. I was a cook when I was a teenager at a fancy restaurant. It was in a town of less than 100 people in Wright on the lakeside. I wouldn't call it fancy, but to the locals in the surrounding towns it's considered fancy. I can say it is the fanciest restaurant in about a 200-kilometer radius. Cooked for him once when he was driving through. Super nice and humble guy. My mom says he also stopped there on multiple occasions. She was a waitress there while I was growing up, and claims he is hands down the most polite customer she ever had. Edit 2. Oddly enough, he also said the singer of Nickelback was a super nice guy. Apparently a little immature and likes to constantly pull teenager-level pranks on people. But a nice guy in terms of conversation and manners nonetheless. Edit 3. Geez, the more I think about it, the more I realize I've met quite a few celebrities. Colin James, Canadian singer, cooked for him at the same restaurant. Was a super nice guy as well. Got up and brought his dirty dishes right into her kitchen and thanked myself and the rest of the kitchen staff for an excellent meal. Bob Seeger. This story is almost 30 years old and he may have changed by now. But at the time he had an alcohol problem, was very annoying and rude. Also thought it was okay to drive around drunk. Got the shit kicked out of him by one of the locals too. He was also dating Anita Wood. After Elvis was discharged from the army, his only contact with Priscilla Beauvoir was over the phone and by mail. 2 months shy of her 15th birthday, the blue-eyed brunette with the turn-up nose remained in Germany when Elvis departed for the United States. Within days there were reports that he was dating Nancy Sinatra. It was 3 weeks before Priscilla next heard his voice, reassuring her that she was the only girl for him, and over the next 2 years she grew accustomed to the rumors and his denials, as well as the pain and frustration that came with loving the world's biggest heartthrobs from a distance of several thousand miles. In a press conference on the day he arrived back at Graceland, Elvis played down his relationship with the girl he left behind. But in truth, though he was dating Anita Wood and several actresses, he seemed to have reserved a special place in his heart for Priscilla. For the time being, Elvis went along with Colonel Parker's belief that an all-consuming relationship would hurt his image and be bad for his career. Priscilla patiently waited for their reunion. Can't imagine such a thing today. He also smelled like shit and the icing on the cake. He was such a self-centered fuckface that he refused treatment for pancreatic cancer for 9 months because his special diet of only like apples or some shit would cure him. I find it hilarious that such a supposed genius died by being so stupid. Edit. Jobs had a rare form of pancreatic cancer where it is curable with a 90% success rate. When he finally changed his mind on his treatment, it was too late for him. Like, yeah, cancer bed etc, but that's kinda what you fucking get. Edit. Additionally, while pancreatic cancer is actually one of the more deadlier cancers, Steve Jobs had a variety of it that was completely treatable with something like a 90% survival rate with treatment. This dude was handed every opportunity to survive and he completely fucked himself with his own hubris. Steve Jobs was a little entitled prick growing up. He had the fortune of great adoptive parents, and when he was bullied, he threatened to drop out of school unless his parents sold their house and moved to a place they really couldn't afford. They did it. He also pulled this "I'm going to drop out" move when he wanted to attend the most expensive liberal arts school, Reed College, yet living down the street from Stanford, only to drop out. He took credit for Woz's design for a contest at Atari and then lied about the prize money and shorted Woz. He then fucked off when he felt like it in between stints at Atari. Apparently they used to joke about what a shit employee he was and dramatically underqualified for the position he bullshitted his way into. The overarching theme seems to be Jobs inflicted his will on you at the expense of your guilt. It wasn't until that fucker flew and started listening to others that he decided to turn an iPod into a phone, get off the dick of PPC and stop making $8,000 machines that public education couldn't afford. He was even a cunt to the mother of his children, but lo and behold, he's the good guy because he named a product after his daughter? Fuck that guy. While he demanded excellence of everyone else, he didn't seem to learn anything on his spiritual conquests to demand it of himself. If anything, he became more of a manipulator. From Wikipedia, Dylan Turner, a New Jersey native studying at Full Sail University, managed XXXTentacion and Ski Mask in 2016. Due to Onfroy's inexperience in music and Turner's inexperience in management, they agreed that Turner would be paid only in the proceeds from the song Look at Me. When this amount grew rapidly, an angry Onfroy broke into Turner's apartment, stole his laptop and stabbed his abdomen. Turner required emergency surgery and suffered life-changing injuries, while the loss of his work on his laptop ended his career. He pledged to drop charges against Onfroy if his computer could be returned, and stuck to his word despite all its files being deleted. XXXTentacion has died a horrible death, and, by reading this, as well as the awful things he did to his ex-girlfriend, I believe he got what he deserved. Trigger warning, really fucked up, violent domestic abuse. The first incident of domestic violence occurred about 2 weeks later. He slapped her and broke her iPhone 6s, because she had complimented a Maui friend on his new jewelry. XXXTentacion later repaired the phone. Later the day, XXXTentacion left the room and returned with 2 grilling implements, a barbecue pitchfork and a barbecue cleaner, she said, and told her to pick between them, because he was going to put one of them in her vagina. She chose the fork. He told her to undress. He was lightly dragging the tool against her inner thigh when she passed out. He did not penetrate her with it. About a week and a half into their stint in Orlando, the woman and XXXTentacion were on their way to a show together. They listened to one of XXXTentacion's songs in the car and she sang along with his verse. Then she hummed along with a verse from a featured artist on the track. After that, XXXTentacion fell silent and left her in the car outside the venue. Inside, they got into a fight. When they arrived home after the show, he took her into the bathroom. And he was asking me why I was singing his friend's part of the song. If I like him, why do I like him? Like, do I ever look at his Twitter? She said. Then, XXXTentacion headbutted her, punched her, stomped on her, and put her in the bathtub, where he continued hitting and kicking her. He also wanted to cut out my tongue because I was singing the song, she said. She tried to run away down the street. He tackled her, causing her head to hit the pavement. She suffered black eyes, a lump on the back of her head, scratch marks, and bruises, including a large bruise on her ankle where he stomped her. In early October 2016, she found out that she was pregnant by XXXTentacion. The pregnancy was planned by both of them. On the afternoon of October 6th, he told her to move from the bed they were lying on. He then went out onto the balcony, where she could still hear him, and called up the person she had slept with while XXXTentacion was in jail, demanding to know everything. When XXXTentacion returned inside, he told her, "You need to tell me the truth right now or I'll kill you in this jit." She said that jit was slang for the unborn child. He then started elbowing, headbutting, and punching her. He strangled her until she almost passed out. He took her to the bathroom and demanded one last time that she tell him everything or he would kill her in the bathtub. She couldn't even recognize her face in the mirror, it looked distorted, and her left eye was completely shut and leaking blood. She was losing vision. She vomited. Excerpts taken from the full article found here. Edit. Just to further piss off the XXXTentacion apologists that seem to have congealed at the bottom of this thread, and to make it harder for them to claim hearsay, here is an audio recording, partial transcript, and analysis of a secret recording of XXXTentacion verbally admitting that he threatened and abused his ex-girlfriend, as well as confessing to the stabbing of 8 people. Pitchfork acquired the 27-minute tape from the Miami-Dade County State Attorney's Office. According to the office, both the prosecution and XXXTentacion's defense considered the tape a confession. XXXTentacion was a piece of shit. There's so much more than this too. This is just one incident. There were many other horrible things he did to other people. When he was in prison, He beat a guy nearly to death just because the guy was gay, then bragged about it repeatedly afterwards. Edit, for the people who want to deny it happened, from Extinction's interview on No Jumper. The dumbass below take whatever X said about himself as fact despite his actions. He opens the story saying he isn't a homophobe but immediately says a bunch of homophobic shit and calls the guy a faggot repeatedly. He said he was respectful of women but look at how he treated them. He always said he was a good guy, but look at his track record. Anyway, from the interview. TLDR, Extinction was in a cell with the guy. As he himself tells it, the guy was staring at him when he came back into the cell to change after a shower, so he viciously beat and curb stomped the guy and thinks the story is hilarious. So they came to me after they kicked him out his room and asked me if they could put him in my room, and I laughed and I was like, y'all can put him in my room, but if he does anything I disapprove of, I'm gonna kill him and I'm not gonna give you any warning, and I said it just like that, and I put it on my life. I said it like that. So he was cool the first few days, so I would speak to him like I would even help him when people would bully him, because like if you a bitch in jail they beat you up, right? Yeah, so, alright, so one day he just got sus, like, he was staring at me type shit. He was staring at me throughout the day. So he's staring at me type shit. So I'm like, yo, I warned you. And I laugh because that's all I say. I laughed and I said I warned you. So I walks out the room to go take my shower and I came back in and like I was trying to calm down, be kosher. So I turn around and I see this nigga staring at me, while like I'm putting on my jumpsuit. You've got to be in a towel in front of them, you have to get naked in front of them. So I go in the corner by the toilet type shit, and put an end tie on my jumpsuit, and I don't put it on all the way, I tie it around my waist, and I start beating his face and like, do you want me to be graphic? I grabbed his face, and like I put it on the corner type shit, because we have these like metal slabs, well not metal, it's like concrete, right, it's like concrete slabs, for like beds, and then there's like a styrofoam shit on top of it. So I pull off the styrofoam type shit, and I threw his head on the corner and I just started stomping in like his jaw type shit, and then as soon as I did that like I remember I just put his head on the corner and I started stomping on him, and then I tried to strangle him, and long story short I was going to kill him type shit, because of what he did. Because he was just staring at me, I was naked, bro, like he was staring at me, you feel me? So I started strangling him, and he's like leaking type shit. I'm strangling him so he doesn't scream. I'm strangling him and I'm about to kill this nigga, you feel me? And then luckily, a guard came over and saw that I was standing over his bed. He didn't see what I was doing, you feel me? So this nigga screams out and he hears him, so like I've got his blood all over my hands, you feel me? All over my chest, literally. Right, so like, and don't think I'm trying to be cliche or a fucking weirdo when I say this, but I was going crazy. I smear his blood on my face, on my hands, I got it like in my nails, like oh bro I had it all over me, feel me?